the Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mystery of life. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola, joining you from the lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples. Those are the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations in what's recently known as Victoria, BC, Canada. And welcome back to the podcast, my guest, Nikiah Seeds. If you're just meeting Nikiah for the first time here, you should know she's been a ceremonialist and a teacher of ritual, myth, and ancestral veneration for like a couple decades now, since her early years as a doula. She's the founder of the Red Moon Mystery School and co-author of the book Moon Mysteries, about connecting with your menstrual cycle, and she's been leading sacred drum-making retreats for years and years. I'm super excited to have Nikiah back. She was last here in 2017 when we talked about sacred beekeeping, but actually we've known each other since around 2007. We've floated in similar circles, and we have some really wonderful people in common. We've also co-facilitated a workshop together where we explored ritual craft through indigo dyeing and drum making and storytelling, where we did a deep dive into the myths of Inanna and Persephone and their underworld journeys. So we've had the privilege to witness each other grow and our careers evolve over the years, and it's fun to be able to have a visit and talk about the thresholds we stand upon now as women at midlife. Originally, we thought we were going to talk about aging and elderhood and embracing the crone and how that archetype speaks to us, but actually, turns out there's still a lot to figure out about this in-between phase of becoming the cunning woman who stands between maidenhood and cronehood. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome back, Nikiah. It has been 5 years. Last time you were on the show, it was spring of 2017. So I'm excited to hear the update. What identities do you lead with now?
Hello, Carmen. Thank you for having me back. My identities are she, her. Those are my pronouns. And I identify as queer, although I'm married to a beautiful man, have been for over 20 years. And then other than that, there's just all that whole beautiful plethora of what makes us human. And maybe we'll get into some of that when we start talking.
Nice. Very excited. So we've wanted to talk about this for a little while because you and I, it's been 5 years since we had an interview. It's actually been much longer than that since we first kind of became aware of each other. We were both at the Social Venture Institute on Hollyhock in 2007. And so we've kind of been in each other's orbit for a long time and at different stages of our lives and careers. And so it's fun to connect with you to talk about archetypes like queens and crones and embracing the great change, the change of life for those of us who menstruate, menopause. So I wanted to frame this out by saying a few hundred years ago, people didn't live as long as we do now. So I think we did kind of jump from naive maiden to cunning woman to wizened crone pretty quick. Now there's these big long gaps. There's extended adolescence. We don't have the same kind of rites and rituals. I realized today, I was just kind of talking to myself in the garden where I was like, I don't fucking have the first clue about gender. I don't know anything. I'm just unlearning so much about what makes me a woman. How do I know if I'm a woman? I don't fucking know anymore. I mean, I have my own personal kind of sense of things, but anyway, the age even of cronehood has shifted now, perhaps. So I'd like to hear your take on this. How do you define cronehood versus midlife?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. And your musing is so correct that we're living a lot longer than we used to, and the rites of passage are very different. We're responding in many ways. So many of us are responding just to what's happening in the times as we unlearn and relearn. And Yeah, so there's this really beautiful opportunity, I think, for us, or folks that self-identify as women, to come at these rites of passages differently. And of course, when it comes to midlife, I feel like we're reclaiming that so much more than we ever have. Now I've completely forgotten the question.
Basically, how do you define midlife and cronehood?
Yes. Well, my definitions might be a little different than what folks are used to. I know recently an old friend of mine from many years ago asked me to join a Facebook group called Becoming Crones. And many of us it wasn't that we're offended. We're like, I'm super down with being a crone. Like, I actually can't wait to get there. But my definition of midlife is not crone.
Right.
And I am, even though I'm perimenopausal, and even women I talk to that are menopausal, they're like, I'm not a crone yet. That's not where I'm at. And I think a lot of times, it's a bit of a compliment to sort of say to a woman, oh, you're becoming a crone. And it's like sort of an term of an endearment. And then I find myself kind of bristling a bit against it because, so my definition of midlife is, I would say, anytime from 40 to, or you could even say 50 to 75. I feel like cronehood, that's your middle of your life, right? So you got like 0 to like kind of in 20-year installments, like 0 to like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
No, I guess it would be more like 40-year installments.
Yeah, and that math, that's 40 years. Yeah,
That's
for
40 years.
folks who were like, I just got through my Saturn return and now I am a woman. Basically, you're saying like, ha ha, you have 10 more years before you're even sort of at that archetypal midlife. I often use the phrase cunning woman, like we're getting like tactical and strategic and we're sovereign by then. What's the phrase or like the term or the archetype that you would use for somebody then who's turned 40?
It definitely feels like queen to me.
Queen.
It feels like we're really stepping into that sovereignty of ourselves. We know who we are in a really different way, that it's just different. And, I've often heard.
Can we just wait? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt. So queen, the reason I have a hard time is like imperialism. And so I'm like, tell me some of the queens that you would relate to. And then I want to hear, I probably totally lost your thought for you, but for those of us who kind of bristle at the term queen, which ones are you talking to? Like, I might think of Boudica, like the sort of queen of the rebellion against the Romans, like I could see her. I think of Hestia as like a sovereign goddess who's like, the priestess of the state kind of thing, but childless by choice. What do you think of as queen then?
That's a really good question. If we're starting to break down the languaging and the concepts around queen and what we see of queen, then it kind of does shift it a little bit. So to answer your question in two parts, I think the credit goes to Jane Collins, hope I said her name right, in Australia. And she, instead of queen, I believe she calls it Magda. And so she's kind of played with the language a little bit. She's using a different term for queen. So it's that midlife time. So, maybe we don't necessarily need to use that word, but I guess if we're talking about archetypal aspects of queen, I definitely have those sovereign deities in my mind. And, for me, I think about Demeter. She's very clearly in that middle time of her life, and she's sovereign. She knows who she is. She knows what she's all about. And so, there's less of that royalty sort of feeling.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I feel that. Yeah. Sovereign works for me too, where it's like, I come from myself. I have agency. There's self-efficacy. There's competence. There's confidence. I inspire confidence in others. There's a warmth and a firmness at the same time, kind of that competent protector archetype. But yeah, sovereign is a word I've been working with for a while. And, sort of in my mind independent from the word queen. But when I really think of it, it's like, yeah, it's that same archetype, but stripped of the need to be pedestalized, and nobody's got to kiss the ring. Let's put it that way.
Exactly. Self-actualized.
You can kiss my ass. You don't have to kiss the ring.
Yes, exactly. What did they say? The fuck it 40s and the fuck you 50s
Yes.
and the whatever they, it's in that realm of, we just care less.
Yeah.
you know? And so to find that word that really sums up our sovereignty or our self-actualization, that's where kind of queen comes in. And it may not work for everyone.
Right.
So,
And so cronehood, you're saying that doesn't start, you don't think, till 75. I'm like, man, I can't wait that long. If it takes that long, I want the silver hair. Had this realization recently that we were doing some creative work around disability and chronic illness and things like that in my network. And one of the insights I had doing the creative work was that I don't want to age and be frail. Like I was like, oh, I actually have a strong fear of being frail. And so I need to like create the image of me as like stocky and thick and robust and like slow moving, but like good stamina and like going at my own pace. But honestly, if I have to wait till 75 to be a crone, I'm going to be like very sad. What makes you extend cronehood to 75 instead of say like 60?
Well, that's so interesting because I can wait. I feel like I'm really ready for that. I guess what it is if you've spent time with someone over 70, there's a difference. You can feel it in your bones. They are crones. They're just, I am not there yet. I just know it, right? I'm pushing 50. So of course I'm not there yet, and maybe I suppose like assigning a specific age is kind of ridiculous, to be honest.
Kind of arbitrary.
Like,
yeah.
Like some people are going to have that in them earlier. It's just the nature of the beast, right? I mean, I'm a full empty nester in perimenopause, and like none of my kids, friends, parents are my age. Like I am young to be an empty nester. So I'm hitting some milestones early and some milestones I still need to hit. So maybe 75, you might be 60, 65, but I spent time recently with my mother-in-law who's in her 80s. And I really can't put words to it other than to say it's different, and they're at a really different place in their life, and they're crones, and you can't force that.
That's true. My therapist, Penny, who's so fabulous, I'm always like, I love your silver hair, because I love yours too, of course, and want it so bad. And I made a comment one time about like, I don't want to get a farm for the first time when I'm like 60 and like start farming at 55 or 60. And she looked at me and said, 60 is not old, Carmen. And I was like, oh, no, that's not like a negative thing. I want it sooner. So it's true. 60 is not 70, is not 80. It makes me wonder if maybe there's some more refinement around the term elder then, because I would definitely consider Penny and like some of the people that I think about. The first time I heard crone, I was like in my 20s, and my roommate's mother was turning 60. We were at university, and she was like, oh, I'm having a crone party. And I was like, what's a crone party? And she said what it was. And I was like, oh, that sounds amazing. And so since I was 20 something, I was like, oh yeah, 60 crone party. But I wonder actually if the crone party is like 70, 75. But when you're 60, it is different from 50. It is different from, I'm almost 47. So maybe there's an elder phase that happens.
Yeah. I mean, we're living longer, as you said. So that robust time of our life where we can still farm and create gardens, we're still out there. And, retirement might be 65 according to whatever workforce.
Whoever's retiring. I don't know.
I don't know
who these people are, but okay. Yeah.
Who can actually retire at 65 anyway, who wants to, because we're still really vibrant and with it. And, And then, of course, if we start to think about archetypally speaking, and we actually look at archetypal crones, they also hold a really different energy. We think about Baba Yaga and Kaliak and the imagery that we might associate with them. We automatically know they're crones. So what makes us think that Demeter might be a crone?
Right. We're in totally different. Yeah. Okay. What would you say then are some of the key rites of passage that you personally feel are crucial to mark and differentiate midlife, perhaps elderhood? We're throwing another one in here.
Yeah.
And then cronehood.
And I would add we're becoming elders younger because we need them. We need elders. We don't have a lot of good, healthy elders, and we're living longer. So I kind of like that.
True.
So I thought about this recently, and I guess I'll speak for myself here. So I have kids. So, for myself, I'll probably have grandkids in my 60s, but there's something about, I guess that would be a reproductive rite of passage, right? Or you become a grandmother. There's something about your kids being a certain age if you have them, right? So if you don't have kids, it's about, we tend to look at community and we tend to look at career, and we're looking at, I think it's an inner, what's the word I would look for here? I'm going to laugh and say it's perimenopause. My brain is just completely losing everything. Yeah, there's just an interchange that happens, and it's kind of something that you notice when you talk to somebody who's gotten to that place. It's kind of hard to explain.
I wonder if there's like a courage, there's like courage that comes that kindles this, I don't know, I'm going to call it like a mobilization. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you are acting and doing more, but that you are not kind of idle or passively, like life isn't just kind of happening to you anymore. When you think about childhood and adolescence, there's some very clear physiological, emotional, social things that are just happening to you. Right? And then there's this whole period of time where you are deciding you're either going to be this like passive witness to your life, or you are making choices and you are determining your preferences, and you are, making alliances and figuring out, who your people are and what you have to offer them, and like what your gifts are that you came in and were bestowed by the greater powers, and what your talents are going to be, the strengths you're going to hone and refine and practice and then offer to the world. So I feel like in that sovereign place, there's the courage to act on what you know somehow. I don't know. What do you think?
Absolutely. Yes. And there's, I've talking to women my age, I'm hearing over and over and over again, this readiness to, I think it has to be a readiness, because there's a certain amount of people pleasing that we do, even if we're not people pleasers, even if we've worked on our stuff, where we, like you said, there's that, we're gathering our community, we're figuring out who we are. And those are rites of passages that we're kind of doing in our 20s, 30s, early 40s. And then something starts to shift in our late 40s, again, on the spectrum for different folks, where, as my friend Angela Prider would put it, get off the tit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like, enough already. And so I'm starting to hear things from colleagues and friends like, I don't want to do that same thing anymore. I don't want to be in sort of like running around the community all the time, like give, outward. That time is feeling really done. I need to look at how I view my work, and that needs to change. My life needs to go into my work, not my work into my life. And so we're moving things around. We're changing things. And for some of us, we're literally upending our entire careers and whatnot. And I attribute it to, if you think about the myth of Inanna, or the story of Inanna, she puts her ear to the great below. And in the story, she's actually middle-aged. Her kids are grown. And she hears this call from the great below, and she can't ignore the call any longer. And so there's this need to go on some sort of an inner quest, which is different from the type of quest we go on in our 20s, looking for ourselves.
For sure. And, it's interesting because, well, so that brings up two things for me. So the first part is when we're younger, there are elders in the community who are creating rites and rituals for us. Hopefully, for many of us, it didn't happen, but we reached an age where we realized that we were lacking that, and we needed initiation and wanted it before we, became the adult in the room. It was like we recognized there was something in us that wasn't quite complete yet, and so we go out on these different rites. For instance, some of us have them that happen, like we have children or we get married or that sort of thing. But I think more and more people are choosing not to have children for all different kinds of reasons. And so this is like kind of the next piece is like, well, what are the rites of passage if you decided you don't want to be a mother? How do you become the cunning woman? And I feel for folks because we live in such a heteronormative society that it just really sucks. It just really sucks. However, I think part of the midlife shift that happens, and this could just be because of where we are at, because of world history, is like, oh, so then there's an age where you decide what your ritual or your rite of passage is going to be. Like maybe your rite of passage to become the cunning woman or the sovereign is to have children. Great. If that's what you want to do, great. But if it isn't, you still need to decide what am I standing for? And then give yourself that initiation, which could be a really great trip into the wilderness, or it could be a year of sabbatical, or it could be a training that is totally different from whatever your career was, or it could be anything. But I do think that there's an age at which a part of this archetype is that you hit an age where you realize, oh, I have to self-design my own rite of passage. So Inanna is like, oh, I put my ear to the great below and I hear something, and now I must act on that. And this is my great something that is going to be my initiation for this age. And I think the problem is that people are doing it unconsciously. They're like, oh, I'll get that other training, or I'll go on that trip, or I'll buy that house for myself, or whatever it is. And then they're still looking over their shoulder being like, am I an adult yet? Right? And it's like, oh, we actually know how to do this. We need to have some ritual. We need to have some ceremony. We need to like collect our friends and decide like, what is this we're doing? Because if we don't do it intentionally, it's just going to happen to us. And then we keep questioning. But I think that's an important piece, is you decide, what is my rite of passage going to be? I know as a person who serves in a lot of different ways and creates rituals for a lot of other people, I'll have big things happening, like, the book's coming out. And my friends are like, okay, Carmen, your book comes out on October 18th. Your birthday is the 28th. It seems like you should have a thing. And I'm like, oh, they're like, no, not just like a book event, not just, you should, don't you see? Like, this is totally your jam. Like you have a huge event happening and you need to witness it. People have to witness this, that like, this is a thing. And I'm like, oh, you mean I have to create my own like ceremony and rite of passage? And it's like, well, kind of, you have to like at least ask people, hey, would you like have a party for me? Because a big thing's happening. And if you don't help me, I'm just going to drink a bottle of Moscato d'Asti and like eat cake in bed. It's like there is a point where we have to be like, oh, I'm the adult here. I have to recognize this is an important shift and create my own ceremony for it. Probably similar to like perimenopause and menopause. So what are you, I would love to know, like, what are your rites of passage or things you've done that you're like, I'm in my queen archetype, and like, here's an example of a ritual that I could do to mark that.
Oh, there's so much I want to say. Yes. you're so right that we really have to create our own. There isn't, quite yet, there isn't a book that really talks about this. And it happens before we even hit perimenopause. There's this separation that starts to happen. For myself, I knew that I couldn't live in Vancouver anymore. I needed to be in the country. I needed to get out. The kids were, it was 2 years before our daughter was going to graduate high school. It was more than that. It was 3 years. And I heard the call. Now, it wasn't until I moved to New York, which is a whole other story, how I ended up here and not in the country, quite yet, that I realized that whole separation that was happening, that big decision was actually something that was happening within me. Mm-hmm. Right. And so the marking of it happened after, and it sort of has been like that in my life. It was the same after I had my firstborn. When I even first encountered the story of Anana and went, wait a second, actually becoming a mother actually is an initiation. Mm-hmm. And so I realized I am currently in a huge initiatory process. And even just to acknowledge that for oneself, I think can be really empowering. Mm-hmm. To say, yeah, I don't really know what's happening quite yet, but I know I'm in something. Mm-hmm. And this feels really powerful. And when I come through it, I'll know and I'll mark it. And so for me, the marking happened when I realized I was in it. And I talk to all of, my mentoring students and all the people that come to work with me, and I am the most practical witch you will ever encounter. I really go for the whole, let's break this down. We have to be able to do everyday magic in a really practical way. In other words, it has to fit into our lives. Otherwise, in some ways, it's just rote or it's hollow. So yeah, I guess what I would say about that, and it's interesting, is I used to do red tents, and now I'm getting calls and emails from women my age saying, how you did that red tent for my daughter? I think I need one for me. Do you do that? Can you put up a tent in my backyard and can we gather? Because I feel like I need something. I just don't know what. And, it's yeah. So I'm just trying to think if I actually answered your question, but there's something about the knowing and acknowledging. And then I love that you're having a big party for your book, because it's a big deal and it's exciting for all of us who get to read it.
Thank you. I don't know if it'll be big. It'll be a lot of small things maybe, but, but thank you. So what do you think then? Okay. So then there's this period of elderhood. We're still busy because we're we're super clear by then on who we are and what we care about and what we don't give a shit about. And so that means that relationships are changing, people's expectations, people can get a little hurt feelings when we do what we want to do and not what they expected us to do. What would you say are some of the ways we could help to mark cronehood better? That, we tend to have people age and want them to be away and not remind us in this very youth oriented, uninitiated Western culture. But also we're not living intergenerationally often as much. Maybe we will in the future because collapse and who can afford to live on their own. But essentially it's hard if there are elders and crones in our lives. How would you say we could help mark that? What are the rites of passage that could be healthy as opposed to getting shuttered away or put in care? What are some good rites of passage for cronehood?
Well, it's interesting. I remember a time when I was coming up, much like you do, where we kind of did have these gray-haired women. They were in their, probably 60s. For me, I have a few in my mind that were pivotal for me. And they had croning ceremonies, right? And that excitement to I want to be there. I want to do that one day too. And it was really empowering for them because they hadn't probably had any rites of passages until their croning ceremony. So these particular ceremonies that you and I were experiencing, probably 20 years ago, were really powerful. Now, something has happened in the last 20 years where for some reason have made our elders in all our different pockets of community quite irrelevant. And so what I was once looking forward to doesn't really feel like it's there. If anything, I noticed, as I'm, in the world doing my thing of mystery school and my offerings, I actually, and I'm not even 50 yet, am struggling to feel relevant because there's so much emphasis put on, and I'll speak for myself here. Part of that is to do with like the young folks coming up, which are exciting, and I'm excited for them as well, but they're a little bit more tech savvy, and, they just they're just able to get out there in a different way not all of us, I'll speak for myself, than some of us are. And so to stay relevant is really, really tough. And I'd be curious actually to talk to some younger women and to hear what they think. Like, it seems like, again, speaking for myself, there's a bit of like, kind of like, screw you, old one. Like, I'm going to do it my way. And your way is kind of old and dated. And, like, why did I have to pay my dues when, like, I can go do this weekend workshop and like be certified in a heartbeat, or I can do whatever. So I would love to see just that same reverence that I had for my elders, and often it was like, so back in the day, if I go back 20 years, I was deeply involved in the midwifery community. So we were often bringing in midwives from other places to come and talk on different subjects, or childbirth educators. And, I worked a lot with Gloria LeMay back in the day, and she was one of my first teachers. And it actually, just as a little side note, she was going to be my midwife for my second child, and she got put in jail.
Right.
Like, she was this rebel, like, wise woman,
Yeah.
and she went to jail. So I had to go get a registered anyway. Yeah. And there was something about that. And, probably at the time, if we're talking 20 years ago, she probably wasn't quite a crone yet. She definitely is now. Right. And so I would just love to sort of see us having a deeper understanding. And I think what that means is that you and I, Carmen, have to be having these conversations like you're doing today. And we need to be inviting young ones into spaces with older women, middle-aged and crones, like we attended, like those ceremonies where we got to see cronings. And nowadays I find it's often all crones croning each other.
Right.
We need to be having mixed spaces so that there is that sense of, oh, I can't wait till one day I am, and I think that's just, we're just coming out of COVID. And like you said, we're in this weird collapse time and things are changing. It really is about, let's get us offline and in person, or if we're going to do stuff online, it really needs to be mixed groups of folks coming together of all ages, genders, all the things. I think that's the antidote for this, so that, because like the truth is, come on, we're making it up as we go, right? Like, I like crones.
We're unlearning a bunch of stuff, and like that is very valid, like that. Yeah, there's we the rituals we need today are not the same as what was needed 25 and 50 and 100 years ago. So yeah, a lot of things are we're having to like have it come out and be inspired by land, by each other, by the moment, and that is legit. That's what folk magic is, right? It's like, it's not a high magic where it's like, this is the protocol and this is, we, do it in this order. It's like, okay, well, those of us who are more animist in our bent, it's being dreamed through us. And so there's room for correction and course correction and unlearning and relearning. And yet we're still trying to carry those threads forward. And I still appreciate the learning of like, what is a crone party? What are you doing? How's that going to go? Wow. Like it has to come from somewhere. And like you said, I think the intergenerational mixing and having lots of compassion in all the directions, right? It's like, yeah, sometimes I think if we're being honest with ourselves, sometimes there can be like a very quick urge to correct. And, I was leading somatics one day online, as I do in the network. And one of the prompts I gave is like, so if you have been conditioned to be a good girl or a good boy, or a good student, and you want to say no to that identity, this is your opportunity. You can just lay that down now. And somebody in the chat private messaged me while I was in the middle of teaching and was like, oh, just so you know, a better gender neutral term than girl or boy would be child. And in my mind, I was like, okay, thank you. However, I meant what I said. If you were conditioned as girl and you're like, no, thank you. If you were conditioned as boy and you were like, no, thank you. But there was like this kind of reflexive urge to correct me because I used the term girl or boy without actually listening to like, what am I saying? I'm saying if you reject that conditioning and identity, this is your chance to say, no, thank you. And so push your arms out and da, da, da. But instead of responding, because I was in the middle of teaching, I was like, okay, so that is somebody's reflexive vigilance around harm. And that, the teacher may have harmed somebody by saying that. And so it's like, look how, and I can chalk that up too, to like vigilance around whiteness. Look how whiteness shows up. We not only are afraid of harming each other, but like we're very quick to correct. But I said what I meant. Like that's it. No, meant what I said what I meant. So I think part of the like transmission of information is actually like having a generosity of spirit that like, yeah, we acknowledge harm when it happens. We like trust intent, but we're still going to acknowledge. And at the same time, we have to be a little less vigilant and quick and a little bit more contextual and nuanced and be like, is this harm that just happened? Let me go back and actually think about that. So, I just took the correction. It's like, oh, thank you. And carried on. And at the same time, I still use that term. And now I just say, listen to my words. If that is not an identity that you want, this is your opportunity to like ritually and somatically reject it. That's a gift I'm giving you, is a moment to say no, thank you, and choose something else like student or child or whatever that, was the better word for you. So I'm totally with you on this. We need to have mixed spaces, and we need to have the emotional and somatic resilience to be in a mixed space and trust intent, acknowledge harm, but also like lay down a little bit of the vigilance around it, that we're just waiting for somebody to fuck up and can't wait to correct them on that, right? Because of course we're going to fuck up. I started with, I don't know first fucking clue about gender based on what I was taught. I don't know. I think I'm a woman. I don't know. So I obviously want to hear any thoughts you have on that. And then I'd love for you to guide us into what are some things that have been consistent for you. You brought up the myth of Inanna. Have there been other allies or deities or myths that have been really consistent with you through your midlife time?
I love that, Carmen. You're right. The times we need to be constantly responding to new information as we're getting it. And mixed spaces are really different than they used to be, right? And sometimes mixed spaces aren't necessarily safe for all folks either, right? Especially when we're talking about unpacking certain things, unpacking whiteness, right? And I'd be really curious. I would actually love the opportunity to sort of lead a mixed space that's got like all sorts of different genders and folks in there, as well as ages, and see what that could look like for all of us if we're just show up with these sort of open hearts and willingness to kind of bumble. Because Lord knows I have been unlearning hard as a white settler woman, right? It's a whole different time for all of us. And so we have the opportunity to not only change how we're viewing ourselves on the spectrum, from everything from neurodivergence to gender to age and ageism And which is kind of what we're talking about, right? We're talking about, well, what does it look like if we reimagine that time of life of crone and queen, and maybe like breaking that up even, or breaking it down even further. And this is where the archetypes and deities can come in handy, but not always, because we don't actually necessarily have, I don't want to say this, like, we don't have enough deities on the gender spectrum. Although Kuan Yin's a great example, because Kuan Yin was, I don't know if you know the story of Kuan Yin, but anyways, I'm digressing a little bit.
I'm sure there are people who want to hear the story of Kuan Yin.
Well, I love the story of Kuan Yin for so many reasons. So the basic broken down, oversimplified version is just that Kuan Yin was like a monk, born with the gender at birth, assigned at birth as male, and meditated and achieved nirvana. And in this moment of great nirvana, looked back. And when he looked back, he saw suffering of the world in such a deep and profound way, and decided that he wanted to actually go back and, I guess, ask the gods who be, how can this work? And they said, well, if you want to go back, you can, but you actually have to become a woman in order to be compassion for all suffering beings. And so he came back as Kuan Yin, who is the deity of suffering and compassion. And depending on how her hand is pointed out, is compassion towards others, but sometimes the hand is pointed in, and that's self-compassion, which is what I love about Kuan Yin. And I love the gender bending aspect of that. And it's still a little bit binary, but the story is beautiful nonetheless.
Yeah, I feel that. And I sometimes have folks think about people like Loki. Loki, it very often showed up as a female, or like, Loki gave birth to children and that sort of thing. So there's like Norse deities. I've heard there's even tales of Inanna where she shows up in a more masculine presenting form as like very warrior. Like, I think there's, a lot of scholarship yet to be done, but there's also a lot of scholarship that has been done and just is overlooked, or it just takes a long time to get into the mainstream. I mean, gosh, it can take 20 years for the world to catch up to scholarship. So I hear what you're saying, though, that like it shouldn't be so hard to find deities who have non-heteronormative gender expression, because it's not like a new concept.
No. And of course, if we start to talk about menopause and perimenopause and, folks that are male that are having menopause, and what does that look like for them? And there's a fabulous new book out called
What Fresh Hell Is This?
What Fresh Hell Is This?
My gosh, it's so good. What's her name? Heather Corinna?
Yes.
Oh and it's so fabulous.
Actually, I think Heather is a they, them. I believe they're non-binary. And the whole book is written in non-binary terms, so that it's written for folks that are not necessarily, anyways.
Yes.
Love it. Now,
yes.
I'm a she, her, self-presenting female. And so for me, when I think about my own personal deities, and I'm excited to talk about this because I had this whole beautiful moment with my daughter recently that I would love to share. We were over on the island. I was having a photo shoot, and I don't even know what happened. My mother-in-law, you have to understand, my husband's Indian, and so my mother-in-law, mother-in-love, and I are very close. She's become my own mother over the last 20 years. But you're talking about like, Pakistani woman who's been in Canada for 50 years or whatever, but very, very conservative in many ways. She was a gynecologist. Get the idea. But, when you get to know someone and they know you, she says to me, "Oh, I've got something for your photo shoot I thought you might like to take." And she hands me a pomegranate. And I was just so touched because it's just so me. And she knows I like to eat them as well. And so I take the pomegranate and I bring it downstairs where my daughter Zara is getting ready to go. And I say, "Would you like to come with me today?" It was very spontaneous. And, she's quite shy. Anyways, long story short, she agrees. And as we're kind of getting ready, she sort of looks over at the pomegranate, and she says something about Persephone, or if it was me that kind of made the link, but all of a sudden the whole story of Demeter and Persephone comes into the room in like this huge way. And so you have to understand is at this point, my daughter and I have been separated for a year. I've moved to New York. We flew the coop. She didn't. So she stayed in Vancouver in our family home. She's going to university, and we're living in New York. And so now we're reunited and we're together again. And she's different. She's become a young woman while I was gone. I'm going to get choked up. So the whole myth comes into the room, and I say to her, well, if you come, which she's now just said yes. So what do you think about Demeter and Persephone? Do you know the myth? And she's like, oh yeah, I did Greek, whatever at university this year. She's at SFU. Yeah, I know the story. And I'm like, well, what do you think about kind of playing with this myth? So anyways, we get to the photo shoot. I tell the photographer, who's completely not aware at this point, she's like, okay, you're not going to believe this, but a friend of mine wove some wheat together that they grew and harvested themselves. And I brought this like woven sheaf of wheat for the photo shoot. Oh my gosh. Right?
What?
So we go down to the water, and there's this like small river she takes us to. And my daughter and I start breaking open the pomegranate. My daughter's eating the seeds. And then there's this moment where she says, okay, you need to leave your daughter. You need to walk to the other side of the river. So I'm standing on the other side of the river, and I'm holding this sheaf of wheat. And I know that I'm Demeter in every ounce of my bones. I am her. And I'm looking at my beautiful young daughter, and she's got this pomegranate in her hands, and she's holding it out, and the seeds are spilling over, and there's like red juice dripping down her hands. And I mean, obviously I was verklempt. I was weeping at one point, and we just did this whole photo shoot, and the myth just swept us away. Like I really felt that we were a living embodiment of these two times of life. My daughter as this young woman, and she had the maiden-like feeling, but the truth is she wasn't really, she's just on the cusp. Like she's leaving maidenhood too. She's not, she's moving into whatever that next thing is, not mother. What's between maiden and mother? These young women are fucking powerful and smart, and these young people, I should say, not just her, but anyways, I sat down, I can't tell you how many times, to share the photos from that day and to write about the experience. And it's been a year now. We're going into the following summer, coming up on it. And I only now feel like maybe I could talk about what it really meant to embody that myth, and how important that separation was for us, and how she changed due to it. And, I know that you have a beautiful, I love your rendition of the story.
Yeah, I tell it. What episode is that? 63, Learning to See in the Dark. Very much identify with Demeter waiting and waiting. Then finally Persephone returns. Like oh my gosh. I have strong relationship with that myth too, but what a beautiful ritual. And I love the yes signs, those auspicious signs from the greater forces being like, oh, and here's some wheat for you. Like, I love that. I love that. It makes me think. So when we think back to the Eleusinian mysteries back in ancient Greece, of course, so every fall, all the Athenians, citizens, they'd be getting ready to undertake these 9 days of ritual of the Eleusinian mysteries, or they'd move from Athens and go on the sacred way to Eleusis, and they would have these stations they would hit with all these different rituals that would happen every day. And they'd be fasting all day and walking, and they'd cleanse in the river and the sea, and then they would see Baubo, who would tell bawdy jokes. And there was like one crone who was so irreverent at the beginning, but also then at the end, Hecate would be there in her crone form, right? Her Hecate of the crossroads of like, now we're shifting. And at the end of the Eleusinian mysteries, when Persephone and Demeter come together, it says, and then Hecate joins them and becomes protector and essentially like godmother to Persephone, and is like, and now I am joining you two together as this overlighting space holder for your relationship. I've witnessed what's happened, and now the mystery can begin again. And so that's where that kind of the try what's the word I'm looking for? Here's my moment. The trio, and the triune come together of the maiden mother crone. And so that's where, Hecate has many different forms, but that's another particular kind of crone archetype that I really love, that it's like, this is the one who's tracking where people are in the great mysteries. And she's the one who's like, you've come to reunion, and it's important to like come together and acknowledge how important this reunion is. And like you said, how changed you both are, and how the separation was necessary in order to become who you need to be. And now we can begin this cycle again. So I'm curious, what crone archetypes do you look to, or maybe look forward to work more closely with? And you mentioned also the kayak. That's another big one of mine. Oh my gosh. I just can't wait till I can wear the shawl you made me every day, all the time. And like, I'm just going to dress in like wool culottes and tartan and all the, I love that shit. What kind of crone archetypes do you look to for inspiration? And do you hope to work with more closely as you age?
Yes, all the things. And talking about Hecate, I feel like I've been working with keys a lot, but it's more like because I'm unlocking something, at some point I feel like I'll maybe unlock that gate and step through the threshold into my crone time. And because it's so different for each one of us, I don't really know when that's going to be for me, but I'm hoping to get a little more bizarre. So I'm trying to think of like, I'm kind of rocking the cat glasses in my midlife here, but I tell you, I'm working my way up to some wacky ass outfits. They're going to be purple and orange. The deities, of course, Kaliak, and, as for my Slavic ancestral lineage, the Baba Yaga has been one that I've actually been working with a lot over the last couple of years. And I love this because she actually has a few different forms, and she tends to be a bit of a shapeshifter in many of the different stories. So I kind of love that about her. Now, she's definitely represented as evil, as most crone archetypes are. But what we, sometimes fail to recognize is that, if you're nice to her, she'll grant you some pretty great things. And so there's something really inspiring to me about Baba Yaga. And I feel like she's ancestral to me. But I got some wacky old ancestors, the crone ancestors, and they're all about the purple and orange and turquoise and
and maybe they are in more that Baobo, speaking of like elders and crones, I had a opportunity to do like a 2 days of workshopping with Jean Shinoda Bolin when she came to Victoria a number of years ago. I know. Talk about Goddesses in Every Woman, read it in high school. All our friends, we all took it. I was very Artemis at the time, naturally. But, so totally influenced by Jean Shinoda Bolin. And she talked about Baobo quite a bit. And she had written a book at that time about Artemis. I can't remember the name of it, but that's kind of like that older, irreverent, throwing jokes, dressing wild, flashing her boobs, like that kind of, it being inappropriate and inappropriate times, but also being a keeper of knowledge. And one who you got to go through to get the information. Of course, Demeter goes and it's like, help me. Can you help me find my daughter? And she's like kind of not helpful, but also is sort of like, don't take yourself so seriously. This is reality. This is what is happening. You don't need to be a gloomy roomie about it. Just like getting your shit together, Demeter. So there's like a tough love, that can come. But she's also very wild and very funny. So I want to bring her in because maybe that's one that I'll be orienting towards myself. So as we're coming to the close here, you've already answered the question, and maybe we probably don't need to hear any more about where people find grief and rage and what you're doing about it. Oh my God. It's really nice. I do like asking people like, so how do you process grief and rage? But I also find it really exciting when people are returning to the podcast and I can ask the last question, which is, where are you finding the most joy and pleasure these days, Nikiah?
Ooh, juicy. Well, I want to that end, I'll weave in my last ally that I've been working with, and that is the bear. And the bear has been a really important ally because it's all about rest and that hibernation time. And so I feel like if we're going to talk about joy and pleasure, we got to talk about rest. And, as I unlearn my colonized ways as a white settler woman, one of the things I'm even getting choked up a little bit, really, really embodying or feeling so deeply in my body is this unlearning busyness and the, what's the word? That it's somehow like a good thing, right?
Right.
And unlearning the colonized way of thinking around success. And I feel like maybe it's possible, I don't really know, that kind of our crones, they kind of already know that. And it's like the greatest held secret. They're all laughing at us going, oh, they're just running around like little chickens. They just don't even know they don't have to put out that much energy. I mean, when are they going to learn? And to be fair, I'm still running around, but I'm learning to find pleasure and joy and in rest, as opposed to having my rest time full of anxiety and like I should be doing something else, which has plagued me a good portion. And a lot of that has to do with, okay, so I moved to the US. Oh, sorry, you can't work. Sorry, you have to wait for permission to work. You have to shut your entire business down. And if anyone who's listening to this is an entrepreneur, you know that we don't work 9 to 5. We work all day, all night. So I've had a year of, now I was allowed to nurture, and I was working, but I wasn't allowed to make money. So I just feel like I just had the goddess just bitch slap me and just said, rest, stop it right now. And perimenopause came in and knocked me on my ass anyway. So I needed to get my health in order to be able to navigate this time a little bit better. So I've had the opportunity to do that. And just, that's what I would say, I guess.
I love it. Good advice. I'm curious, are you a good napper?
I am now.
Yeah.
There's no choice, really. When you get taken out, you get taken out.
Totally. Yeah. I have learned how to nap, and I am a grade A all-star team napper now. And
20
I love
minutes
it.
in
Absolutely. And I'll text the group chat of other women, friends and older, and be like, nap time, or send a little GIF that says nap time. And everybody's like, oh, good for you. And anytime somebody's like, I'm taking a nap, we send them celebration, because I totally hear you. We valorized productivity and whiteness and capitalism, man. What a scam. What a scam. And it does take a long time to just reset your metabolic set point for productivity. Just getting time doesn't actually do it, because you're still kind of running. I'm still cranked.
Oh, totally.
I'm still cranked it takes me a week to just relax a little bit more, but I've done better now that I've taken up napping. Rest. That feels like really good advice for those of us who are struggling with that. That's really great. Well, I'm so glad that we got to have this conversation and share it with other people. I'm really looking forward to sharing more time with you when the book does come out in the fall, and you're going to do some bear work and some rest stuff, and we're going to collab a little bit on a bit of a book launch in the fall. People can just stay tuned. There's more fun things coming, but this was really great to be able to jam on elderhood and sovereignty and cronehood. And I really look forward to the next time, maybe 10, 15 years down the road, we'll have another check-in. How's it going? And maybe there'll be crone parties in our future. I'm very excited for that.
So. Oh, I would hope so.
Yeah.
We should definitely be. Yes.
For sure. All right. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Nikiah.
Thank you so much.
It's so much fun to talk about these things. I'm feeling powerfully motivated right now. I don't know about you. To keep track of what Nikiah is up to, make sure you check out her website, redmoonmysteryschool.com, and follow her on Instagram at redmoonmysteryschool. I'll also link to those in the show notes, which you can find at numinouspodcast.com. My listener shout out today is to all my listeners in Brooklyn, New York, but especially to my longtime listener, Noelle. I love you. I miss you. I hope to see you on the mountain again someday, or maybe at my dinner table. Really hope you're well. My friends, in case you missed it, Free Week is happening over in the Numinous Network from June 16th to 22. So you can join me for daily live classes and events. So I lead group somatic classes, which is basically like 45-minute stress reduction sessions, but I'm also leading attachment classes and more. And if it's not me personally leading a session, it's one of my dear friends who also teach in the network as guest guides. These are people I've trained with, I've recruited because they are so talented and magical and soothing in their way of being. And they've done tons of training with me as well, taking many of my courses. In fact, they're much more soothing than I am. 100% true. I have amazing humans leading classes. Over 30 classes are happening this month, in fact. That's pretty much standard. We have usually somewhere between like 29 and 39 events every month. Plus, when you join us for Free Week, you gain access to all of my on-demand video courses. So if you can't come to a couple of those 30 plus live events, you could take a class. You could join Free Week and like binge all my body of work, basically. So that includes my attachment courses. There's 2 of them. One is Attachment for Parents of Teenagers specifically. The other one is Secure, the Magical Art and Subtle Science of Attachment. Also, my Intro to Tarot course, my True Prosperity program, which is basically like overcoming money anxiety using hypnotherapy and journaling, which is how I did it for me. Also, my course called Teach Well, which helps you distill your knowledge into an online course in just a weekend. But can I tell you about the most amazing value, though? This is kind of like a side thing that if you don't really know what it is, you don't know what a great deal this is. When you join us for Free Week, you can also try out the Safe and Sound protocol. So, I know some of you are like, what? Yes, if you know of Stephen Porges, his work, if you know about polyvagal theory, then you probably know what I'm talking about when I say that I'm a certified provider of the Safe and Sound protocol. And so when you sign up for Free Week, you access the Safe and Sound protocol in my group program. I mean, most providers would charge you like hundreds of dollars just to get started with the SSP. So if you're curious about a program that increases vagal tone and smooths out the functioning of your autonomic nervous system just by listening to particular music it's music that's been filtered to stimulate inner ear muscle. Anyway, I'm kind of getting into it. The thing is, it's a great deal. So if you're interested in Free Week, you should really consider getting on my newsletter, because you gotta be subscribed to my newsletter in order to receive the Free Week access link on June 16th. So sign up for my newsletter at carmenspagnola.com. CarmenSpagnola. Until next time, take care.